Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, students, good morning. Good morning, everyone. Let us get started. We have about 2 hours. Today, first welcome to our public forum today on maritime security in Southeast Asia and ASEAN. They're distinct. Southeast Asia is a region, ASEAN is an organization, the South China Sea and the West Philippine Sea. This is a timely public forum that we have today because there's an ASEAN summit. The summit season of ASEAN is coming up later this month in about 3 weeks' time. And also, next year, the Philippines will be the chair of ASEAN. So a lot to do with ASEAN. I think now ASEAN is really challenged, a lot of adversity. There's a Thai-Cambodian, ongoing Thai-Cambodian tension and confrontation following clashes in July. And I think the ceasefire is still very, very delicate. At the same time, that we have an ongoing, long-standing now, civil war in Myanmar. So if you look at ASEAN now, it has an intra-regional conflict between Thailand and Cambodia. It has also a subnational conflict in Myanmar. This is the most, to me, difficult time for ASEAN in 58 years. Never has ASEAN seen an outright conflict, a military clash between two member states, Thailand and Cambodia. So it's very alarming and regrettable. But today our topic is a even longer lasting tension and confrontation and conflict in the South China Sea. So the South China Sea has been contested by a range of countries in Southeast Asia, in ASEAN, the Philippines, China and Philippines, but also Indonesia, Malaysia, Brunei, Taiwan. These are Southeast Asian countries and Taiwan laying claims on the South China Sea vis-à-vis China, which has drawn a line around the South China Sea, popularly known as the 9-dash line. So this 9-dash line is really encompassing. And the 9-dash line has been controversial because it covers pretty much the whole South China Sea. Vietnam is also a major claimant. So we have really a big hotspot, flashpoint in the South China Sea. In recent years, there's been also the U.S. Naval presence, what they call the FONOPS, the Freedom of Navigation and Operational Patrols. In the South China Sea, the U.S. is of course a treaty ally of the Philippines. So if you look at ASEAN now, there is a wide spectrum. I think the Philippines now is an outlier on the one side. Outlier being that the Philippines is intentionally standing up to China in the South China Sea, and where the South China Sea overlaps or covers the Philippines' exclusive economic zone, EEZ. The Philippines have called this the West Philippine Sea. So West Philippine Sea is distinct from the South China Sea, even though they overlap. Of course, the South China Sea is much bigger, but if you look at the map where it coincides, where it intersects Philippines, EEZ, is called the West Philippine Sea. So it's very controversial, and if you follow the news, there have been skirmishes, there's been clashes between the Chinese Coast Guard and the Philippine Navy, fishing boats, and there's also going back to 2012, I would say that China's claim to the Scarborough Shoal in 2012, maybe that 2012 was the beginning of the ASEAN division and fragmentation, because the Scarborough Shoal incident led to the ASEAN, under Cambodia's chairmanship, inability to come up with a joint statement for the first time in 2012. So it's been 13 years. South China Sea has become more tense, more divided. It's a hotspot, flashpoint for regional instability. And today we are going to try to tease out some of the themes, the trends, dynamics. This is also a public forum at ISIS at July at this faculty. We always aim and endeavor, strive to be fair and balanced. So there are different views, and I will entertain all views in this forum. But first, we will hear from the speakers that we have lined up today. I have Professor Chanin Tira from Thammasat University. Chan, thank you very much for joining us from Thammasat. And then Justice Carpio. The bios you have with you, and they're very, it will take some time to read out all the bios, but I'll say that Justice Carpio used to be the Supreme Court Justice of the Philippines, and then Dr. Charmaine, my friend and colleague, and then Ambassador Kasit Pirom, who used to be the Foreign Minister in Thailand in 2008, 9, 10, 11. So perhaps we could start by, let me invite the Honorable Justice Antonio Carpio to be our first speaker, maybe for 15 minutes or so. We have about 2 hours overall to give us your assessment. What's happening in the South China Sea and the West Philippine Sea? What can we anticipate moving forward, especially next year when Philippines chairs ASEAN? I have to tell you that there are concerns, including my own, that next year the ASEAN agenda will be dominated by the South China Sea. Are those concerns misplaced? Because the Philippines, this is a front and center existential issue for the Philippines. Justice Carpio.
Thank you. A pleasant morning to everyone. Thank you for attending this forum. The existing international legal order is found in the 1945 United Nations Charter. There are two provisions there which form the bedrock of the international legal order. The first provision says, all disputes between states shall be settled peacefully by negotiation, mediation, or arbitration. And the second provision states, in the settlement of disputes, the use of force or the threat of force is outlawed. And these two provisions have maintained the peace and has prevented another world war for the last 80 years. In the preamble of the UN Charter, they have adopted these two provisions to prevent the scourge of another world war. And it has successfully maintained and prevented another world war. But today, this existing international legal order is threatened. It's being tested in two areas of the world. In Europe, Russia has invaded part of Ukraine to settle a territorial dispute with the use of force. That is why the entire European United Nations and all the peoples in Europe, having experienced two world wars, it is in their DNA that territorial disputes cannot be settled by use of force. And that's why they are supporting Ukraine. They do not want to go back to the period before the 1945 UN Charter. Before the 1945 UN Charter, the rule was might is right. If you have a dispute with your neighbor, you invade your neighbor, and if you succeed in invading your neighbor, you are rewarded with the territory of your neighbor. That was the rule, and that has led to wars and finally to two world wars. And since the nations of the world have seen the power of the atomic bomb in destroying two cities in Japan, Nagasaki and Hiroshima, the framers of the UN Charter decided to outlaw the use of force or the threat of force. But this existing international legal order is now threatened in Europe with the Ukraine war and also in Asia. In Asia, China is claiming almost the entire South China Sea. with its 9, now 10 dash line. The dash lines are still growing. And China has adopted, has amended its Coast Guard law to authorize its Coast Guard vessels to use all force, all kinds of force, including the use of weapons, to enforce its claim under the 10 dash line. And this is in itself a threat of force, which is outlawed in the UN Charter. And beyond the threat of force, China is using gray zone tactics. It is using water cannons. It is ramming Coast Guard vessels of the Philippines and even of Vietnam. So in the South China Sea, the Philippines is carrying the brunt of defending not only its maritime zones, but also the law of the sea, because UNCLOS applies to the South China Sea. There are high seas in the South China Sea. There are exclusive economic zones. And all of this, the high seas and the exclusive economic zones of coastal states, are all encroached by the 10 dash line of China. In the latest map of China, they have called the dashes, the 10 dashes, as its international boundary. What is enclosed by your international boundary is your national territory. So China is claiming all the waters and resources within the expansive 10 dash line as its national territory, including the high seas. The high seas belong to all mankind. All nations of the world can fish in the high seas of the world. Nepal, Laos, all landlocked countries have a right to fish in the high seas of the world. And the natural resources of the high seas beyond national jurisdiction belong to the common heritage of mankind. So Thailand, all the ASEAN states have a stake. Even European states have a stake in the high seas of the South China Sea. And that's why the world has a legitimate interest in the South China Sea dispute, because the high seas of the South China Sea belong to the common heritage of mankind, and China is claiming the entire high seas of the South China Sea. In 2012, China seized Scarborough Shoal, which has been part of Philippine territory since the Spanish times. In 1734, Spain came out with a map of Philippine territory, and it included expressly Scarborough Shoal as part of Philippine territory, and this has been carried over in all Spanish maps of Philippine territory. When the Americans came to be the new colonial ruler in 1898, they adopted the Spanish map of Philippine territory, and that means it included Scarborough Shoal and the Spratlys. So when China seized Scarborough Shoal in 2012, it was an invasion of Philippine territory, seizure of Philippine territory. But we did not use force to retake Scarborough Shoal. We did not send our Navy to retake Scarborough Shoal. We sent our lawyers to The Hague to invalidate the 10 dash line, because we believe in the rule of law. We believe that all disputes must be settled by peaceful means, by negotiation, mediation, and finally by arbitration. And that's exactly what we did. To follow the existing legal order as ordained in the UN Charter to settle all disputes by peaceful means. So we are bearing the brunt of defending not only our own maritime zones and territorial islands in the South China Sea, but also in defending the rule of law, defending UNCLOS and the UN Charter in the South China Sea. And I'm not part of the Philippine government anymore, so I'm a private citizen. So all I can do is to recommend to the Philippine government the next step. And I've been recommending that we bring China again to arbitration on the extended continental shelf, not only China, but Vietnam and Malaysia, because beyond our exclusive economic zone in the South China Sea, there are overlapping areas on the extended continental shelf, overlapping among 3 ASEAN states, Vietnam, Malaysia, and the Philippines. And also China is claiming the same area under its 10 dash line, although China is more than 350 nautical miles away. Under UNCLOS, you cannot claim maritime zones more than 350 nautical miles from your coastline. And so my recommendation has always been we bring all other states, China, Vietnam, and Malaysia, to compulsory arbitration under UNCLOS to settle the overlapping claims in the extended continental shelf. That follows the UN Charter that the dispute should be settled by peaceful means, by arbitration, and besides, under the UN Commission on the Limits of the Continental Shelf, if there are opposing overlapping claims in the extended continental shelf, the UN Commission will not will not resolve the issue. It will allow the parties to decide that by negotiation or by arbitration. And at this stage, of course, negotiation is over because we have been discussing this for the longest time. And so my recommendation to our government is to submit this to arbitration. And in the arbitration, only the three states, Vietnam, Malaysia, and the Philippines, have a legitimate interest because it is within their 350 nautical miles from their coastline, and China is so far away, more than 350 nautical miles away. So we expect that this will be resolved in accordance with the UNCLOS. There's a formula under UNCLOS to divide, to demarcate the extended continental shelf, and I suppose I've talked to the Vietnamese and the Malaysians, and we will be happy to resolve this in accordance with UNCLOS. There's a formula. And so that's my recommendation. And there is another dispute in the South China Sea, the territorial dispute. And of course, in the South China Sea, there is no treaty or convention that requires the parties to the territorial dispute to submit it to compulsory arbitration. And that is the problem. This territorial dispute over Scarborough Shoal and the Spratlys will remain outstanding. Of course, territorial disputes refer to geologic features above water at high tide, because these are the only features that are considered as territory. And all the islands in the Spratlys are disputed among Vietnam, Malaysia, the Philippines, and China. And following the provision of the UN Charter, this must be settled peacefully. And we are now in the late stage. This should be settled by arbitration. So my recommendation to my government is to settle this by arbitration by inviting China, Malaysia, and Vietnam to submit the territorial dispute in the Spratlys to arbitration, because that is in accordance with the UN Charter. Of course, the problem is the consent of China will have to be secured, and I understand that Vietnam and Malaysia are willing to submit this to voluntary arbitration, but China may not. But we have to first offer China to submit this to arbitration, because that is the rule of international law, to settle all disputes by peaceful means, and arbitration is a peaceful means of settling disputes. Unfortunately, even in ASEAN, among the three ASEAN states that have territorial claims in the Spratlys, among Vietnam, the Philippines, and Malaysia, there is no compulsory dispute settlement mechanism within ASEAN to settle a territorial dispute. All the coastal states of ASEAN, there are 10 coastal states of ASEAN, only Laos is not a coastal state, and all 10 coastal states of ASEAN are members, are parties to UNCLOS. So we are bound to settle our maritime disputes by compulsory arbitration. But when it comes to territorial dispute, we are not bound. But territorial disputes is as important or even more important than maritime disputes. So unfortunately, in the UN Charter, it only says member states shall endeavor to resolve peacefully all disputes in a timely manner through dialogue, consultation, and negotiation. There is no mention of arbitration. So it's just to endeavor to resolve. That is a best effort. It's not even mandatory. It's even less than the requirement under the UN Charter. The UN Charter says all disputes shall be settled by peaceful means. But in the ASEAN Charter, it only says shall endeavor. Best effort is not enough. I think the world has moved on. It must be obligatory and with a dispute settlement mechanism that's compulsory. We do not have that in ASEAN. That's why we have a problem between Cambodia and Thailand. I think the present generation of ASEAN citizens deserve better. We, the older members, the older generation of ASEAN citizens, have an unfinished work. We have to revise the ASEAN Charter to make it mandatory. The territorial disputes within ASEAN must be settled by peaceful means, including arbitration with a compulsory dispute settlement mechanism, because as a community of, as an economic union, we can never reach our goal if we have territorial disputes. That's why in EU, before you become a member of EU, you must settle all your territorial disputes with the members of EU. In Latin America, in South America, they have the Pact of Bogota, where all disputes, including territorial and maritime disputes, shall be settled by peaceful means through arbitration as a last resort. We do not have that in ASEAN. So territorial disputes continue to fester in ASEAN, but we have a history of voluntary arbitration. The first voluntary arbitration to settle a terrorist dispute was between the Philippines and Indonesia. At the time, we were under colonial rule, so it was between America and the Netherlands. And we settled peacefully a territorial dispute in Las Palmas. The Philippines lost. We abided by that. And then you have the Cambodia and Thailand border dispute on Preah Vihear that is settled by arbitration under the International Court of Justice. And then Malaysia and Indonesia over Sipadan and Ligitan. Indonesia lost, and Indonesia said, okay, we will move on. We accept the decision. Malaysia and Singapore over Pedra Blanca. Malaysia lost, and Malaysia said, we will move on. So we have a history of settling territorial disputes by voluntary arbitration. Why don't we now include that in the Charter of ASEAN to settle territorial disputes once and for all? Because we owe it to future generations of ASEAN citizens. We cannot bequeath them these territorial disputes. So I end my presentation here. Thank you for your patience and kind attention.
Okay, thank you very much, Justice Carpio. There's also a lack of ASEAN cohesion and reinforcement and unity on this issue on the South China Sea, West Philippine Sea. You mentioned arbitration. The Permanent Court of Arbitration in July 2016 adjudicated, ruled very clearly on all counts that China does not have the rights that it claims in the South China Sea. I would draw your attention a little bit to this. What's happening around here? There's an ASEAN disconnect, a little bit of an ASEAN disconnect between the South China Sea and the mainland Southeast Asia, the Mekong region. In the Mekong region, there's a similar kind of dilemma. So there are these dams that have been constructed along the Mekong River. Right? So dams are river is a regional good. It flows through different countries. Like the South China Sea, there's different riparian states, different states littoral states around the South China Sea. But in this case, in the mainland, there have been these upriver dams that have been detrimental to downstream communities, countries. And China has been able to come up with an alternative framework, the Lanchang Mekong Initiative, Lanchang Mekong Cooperation Initiative, and we call it Mekong Lanchang. Lanchang Mekong is contested, but the lower stream countries don't really favor that, but there's no alternative. So in the South China Sea case, I think if ASEAN can be more united, where the maritime countries can be more supportive of the mainland countries, and vice versa, then I think that could really be the reinforcement that ASEAN could use to leverage and maybe compel some kind of an arbitration. You refer to compulsory arbitration dispute settlement mechanism. So something for maybe the Philippines to entertain as it chairs ASEAN next year. If you pay more attention to mainland Southeast Asia, and the mainland Southeast Asian countries pay more attention to the maritime countries, then ASEAN would be more united and maybe more effective.
Definitely, I agree with you. We have to tackle the problem of the Mekong because the upper riparian states are building dams, and it will affect the lower riparian states. So it will be a big problem later on. And if China will continue to build dams in the source of the Mekong River, is of course in Tibet, and that's under the jurisdiction of China. So it will affect all the riparian state downwards. And that has to be governed by an international treaty, I think. And I think that will be a big problem in the future, and we should be thinking about that now. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me now bring in a mainland view from Professor Chanintira Natalang. To be honest with you, when it comes to South China Sea, it feels a little bit further away for us. Just by location, by geography, we are here in Thailand, around here the Mekong River is almost more pressing. But South China Sea actually is the thorniest regional security challenge for the region, for ASEAN and beyond. And it's been even portrayed or depicted that it could be a flashpoint for even conflict, wider conflict. Ajahn Chanintira, maybe you can give us a little bit of how you see South China Sea, West Philippine Sea within the ASEAN mix, within the regional security framework.
Thanks so much, and thank you again for the invitation to be here today. So yeah, as you and Justice Carpio have been reiterating, the South China Sea is a principal theatre of confrontation, which has global security repercussions, but also for Southeast Asia. So it is something that the whole world should be concerned about. I also would like to, before I actually go into ASEAN and all that, I would like to talk about 3 key developments that make this problem quite worrying today. So first of all, military skirmishes are happening more frequently. I don't think anyone wants outright war. I don't think it's in anyone's best interest, and war will be too costly for either any side, the US, China as well. So I don't think anyone wants outright war. However, what is worrying is accidental military confrontation, that those misunderstandings that come with military skirmishes and then proliferate. I think that's more worrying. Now, adding or complicating that problem is the second point that I would like to make, is rapid militarization that's happening in the South China Seas, and it's happening on all sides. And again, this is complicated by domestic level factors, domestic politics, especially when leaders are feeling that they need to make a strong stance especially with something that involves national security and national sovereignty. Third point is the uncertainty of the Trump administration. So this is worrying, worrying for claimants. Non-claimants should also be worried about this. So just to give you an example, on the 28th of March, the US did say that the MDT, Mutual Defense Treaty with the Philippines, was ironclad. However, after a month later, they started the trade war, so they imposed tariffs and all that. And plus, the US is quite occupied with other problems around the world, Ukraine, the humanitarian disaster in Gaza. So it does make us question how much attention are they going to devote to the South China Seas. So these are three developments that I would like to point out today. Now, within this context, how well prepared is ASEAN? So, Ajante, you pointed out the divisions. I would like to add that they're not only divisions between the claimants and non-claimants, there's also kind of like divisions within the group of claimants and the non-claimants. So let me just tease that out. So first of all, the non-claimants. So they are the mainland Southeast Asian countries. They're more concerned about the Mekong sub-region. Just to give you a clearer picture, China's dam systems, so China is located upstream of the Mekong, so its dam systems control 70% of the natural flow of the Mekong sub-region. So that affects the downstream countries. So those are the mainland Southeast Asian countries. So they're concerned about that. However, this has never been on the ASEAN agenda. It has been on the ASEAN agenda when last time when Vietnam was chair, but it hasn't consistently been on the ASEAN agenda, unlike the South China Sea. So in order to, and, you know, we have divisions and all that, this is a way to get us on board, as you pointed out. I do agree with that. So among the non-claimants, again, you have a variation of how we would react to China's role in the South China Sea. I would say that Thailand takes a bystander role, unless we're given the responsibility of being the coordinator for China at the ASEAN level. Cambodia, as you pointed out, when it was chair, it was the first time we failed to come up with a joint communique. That was in 2012. So you can see that some countries are clearly aligned with China in terms of the South China Seas. So you can see a division within the non-claimants. Now, within the claimants, so these are mainly archipelago states. However, you've got Vietnam, which is a mainland state, but also involved with the South China Sea. So unfortunately, Vietnam is in this very difficult position where it's involved in both Mekong and the South China Seas. And again, you know, there's a variation of how claimants would react to what's going on in South China Seas. The Philippines has taken a very, you know, assertive, transparency approach, taking going down the legal route. Vietnam has taken a more quiet approach. It would rather kind of like use bilateral channels to deal with China's expansion. So again, you know, you have that variation. And again, you mentioned that Philippines is an outlier in this regard. So because we're divided, a lot of impending challenges haven't been dealt with. Myanmar and all that, not just the South China Seas. Now, in terms of the South China Seas, we have this document that we were trying to conclude, which is the Code of Conduct, or the COC. This has stalled. The goal is to have it by 2026. However, this is unrealistic, considering you know, it's advancing at a very slow pace. Again, you know, there are various sticking points, which makes it very difficult to come up with a COC. And of course, you know, China rejected the 2016 arbitration. So it's highly questionable whether, let's say if we do come up with a COC, how do we make it legally binding? Does ASEAN have the resources to enforce this? So, coming up with the COC is one hurdle. Another hurdle is actually enforcing it, which, you know, I think is quite a tall order. Now, another thing is that, you know, China has also rejected other options, for example, joint development, arbitration. So again, we don't have many options at this point. At the same time, I know there are a lot of ASEAN critics out there, but at the same time, I do think ASEAN is the best bet at the moment. Okay, so for various reasons. So one, half of Southeast Asian, half of ASEAN member states are claimant states. Okay. Secondly, ASEAN takes an inclusive approach. So this is quite different from the minilateralisms or multilateralisms that take an exclusive approach that exclude China. And you can't exclude China. China is, well, a stakeholder in this and, a key player. Thirdly, China hasn't actually rejected ASEAN's role. So this does keep that channel of communication open, which can reduce the risk of misunderstanding, accidental military confrontation, and all that. So keeping that channel of communication is very crucial. And fourth, the negotiations for the COC does put ASEAN on an equal footing with China. So at least for the short term, I think ASEAN, we should maintain that channel of communication through ASEAN. Now, in the longer term, just to reiterate Justice Carpio's points, we need to kind of like rethink how ASEAN manages and resolves conflict in Southeast Asia. So manages containing problems, resolving is actually getting to the root. I know a lot of critics out there might think, okay, well, it's a tall order, there's so many obstacles, it's close to impossible, but at least we should try and move forward and find a better way of dealing with our impending challenges. Myanmar has gone on for far too long. Now we have a new challenge, Thailand, Cambodia. It's time that ASEAN does have a bigger role in these regional conflicts. Now, how to deal with intra-ASEAN divisions? Well, one way of doing this is we can have these bilateral talks between the claimants. So this has, for example, Indonesia and Vietnam have this delimitation agreement discussion that has been going on for like 12 years. They concluded it, I think, in 2024, if I remember correctly. It hasn't been ratified, but at least they have been using these bilateral channels to iron problems out. This has also happened between the Philippines and Indonesia. So again, delimitation of this dispute. So if we have these bilateral talks between the claimants, I think this is one way forward of kind of like dealing with our problems and creating a stronger ASEAN. So at that point, I will just hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Kawachan Chanintira. I mentioned earlier about the outlier being Philippines. On the other side of the spectrum is really Laos, I have to say. And sorry to say that Laos is, if you go to Laos, you can really see the Chinese presence in Laos. And so on the one side, Philippines confronting China, on the other side is kind of Laos beholden to China, and then Cambodia too, maybe to a large extent. So ASEAN is this year is a big year for ASEAN. It's going to have an 11th member, Timor-Leste, and it's going to change the complexion, the not direction, but the complexion, the composition changes, the complexion, the characteristics. How ASEAN will work with 11 member states will be something we've never seen before. But I think now, and I'm an ASEAN critic, yet I think now we need ASEAN more than ever. It's funny enough that ASEAN has so many shortcomings, but now, like, if you have no ASEAN, we have nothing. We have no agency. So it's still the one and only agency for Southeast Asian countries. But what to do how to move forward. I think we need to really rethink and recalibrate how ASEAN works. We need some serious, fundamental, far-reaching ASEAN reforms, which is a topic for another forum. But we need ASEAN. So let me come to you, Dr. Charmaine, Mr. Lucha Willoughby. I just call you Charmaine, but yeah, I mean, we've heard from Justice Carpio already, but from you as a more kind of a think tank space, you do a lot of traveling in think tank discussions. What to do with China? Yeah, please.
Thank you very much, Titinan. That's such a big question, and I don't know if I have enough time to address on how the Philippines and the region can deal with China. I'm an academic from the Philippines. I also work in the think tank space in the Philippines. So my remarks today will actually still kind of seem like an outsider looking into what the Philippine government can or should be doing during the chairship in 2026, the chairship of the Philippines of ASEAN. So this month is actually the official turnover of the chairship from Malaysia to the Philippines. Originally, 2026 is supposed to be Myanmar's turn to chair ASEAN, but in cognizance of the political situation they're in, the Philippines has announced that it is ready to take on the challenge, ready to take on the helm of steering the agenda of ASEAN for 2026. Since this month, and the month has just started, since this month is the official turnover from Malaysia to the Philippines of the chairship, we still actually do not know for certain what the theme is or what the priority areas are for the Philippines. This is, of course, in deference to Malaysia ending its chairship this month. So there will be an official announcement later on, and myself included is really waiting and very excited to learn about what the Philippines will be focusing on for 2026. So as we all wait for the official announcement, there have been actually talks or discussions within Philippine academia and within think tank space in Manila about what can the Philippines be focusing on. There are, of course, these big ticket items that have been thrown on the table or presented on the table here today, such as, for instance, the ongoing crisis in Myanmar. As we know, within the framework of ASEAN, the crisis situation in Myanmar is attached to the chair. So as the chairship rotates, then so is the mechanisms for dealing with Myanmar. We heard in several discussions that there have been proposals on whether or not we should have a standing special envoy or a permanent special envoy on Myanmar, but whether or not, or who is supposed to be this permanent special envoy in regard to Myanmar still remains unknown. So discussions are still ongoing. Another big ticket item that the Philippines will need to inevitably put on the agenda during its chairship would be the disputes, the intra-ASEAN disputes. And as Neen mentioned earlier, and Justice Carpio as well, what can ASEAN do really in terms of the disputes in the maritime space and in the territorial space of ASEAN? There are two other big ticket items that have been floated around in Manila circles. One is that the Philippines hopes to get India back into RCEP. RCEP is, of course, composed of 15 Asia-Pacific countries. This is an agreement that was signed in 2020. It includes the ASEAN 10, plus China, Japan, Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. India was initially part of the negotiations, but it withdrew in 2019 because of a variety of reasons, such as an unfavorable trade balance with China, considerations about the negative effects on its dairy sector, economic slowdown, rules of origin. But scholars and think tankers, observers, have highlighted that India's withdrawal is actually because of China's inclusion in RCEP. This is especially worrisome for India because it already maintains a very significant trade imbalance with China. So amongst these big ticket items that the Philippines ought to be looking into for its chairship include Myanmar, intra-ASEAN divisions, hopefully get India back into RCEP. And finally, there's also been some discussions about the Philippines hoping to conclude the stalled negotiations of the COC. This is a big and very ambitious promise, but the Philippines still hopes to maybe finally conclude the COC. This is the legal framework that reaffirms commitment to freedom of navigation and overflight, peaceful settlement of disputes, and so on. There are numerous challenges to the conclusion of the COC, not least of which is the conflicting sovereignty claims, ASEAN's lack of enforcement, the fact that the negotiations have been stalled for 20 plus years already, so getting the negotiations back on track will be especially challenging. But the most important reason for the difficulty in concluding the COC is because of China's refusal to abide by the 2016 arbitration award, which Justice Carpio has mentioned earlier. So these are, of course, the big ticket items that different sectors in the Philippines hope that the Philippine government would be looking into for the 2026 chairship. But there are, of course, other items that seem to fly, so to speak, under the radar. And when we speak about maritime security or the West Philippine Sea, in previous forums, I've often advocated that we should be looking at the West Philippine Sea or maritime security from different angles or from different perspectives. If we were to tell the story of the West Philippine Sea or maritime security, oftentimes there's just one story that we like to tell. And this is the story of sovereignty, territoriality, and all that. As important as those issues are, I argue that there are maybe two other stories that we can tell about the South China Sea, West Philippine Sea. The other story is rooted in the natural sciences. I'm not a scientist per se, but the story that we can tell about maritime security rooted in the natural sciences hinges on the plight of the marine ecosystem, coral reef restoration, what happens under the sea to the fish and the corals and all of that. And then a third story that we can tell about the South China Sea is in regard to what exactly is the impact on human beings. So this is the angle of human security, the people themselves that live off the water. So non-traditional security issues, when we look at the maritime domain, are equally important when we talk about the West Philippine Sea and the South China Sea. Recently in the Philippines, there's been a workshop organized by the Foundation of the National Interest and the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung in the Philippines. And this workshop dealt with issues in the maritime domain, but issues that are under the sea. And the findings of the workshop include that we should be looking into four areas, four policy recommendations that the Philippines, along with its ASEAN neighbors, can really look into and work towards. These include seabed mining and resource governance. We should also, a potential area of cooperation should also be marine environmental protection and sustainable economic development. Third, very importantly, we should be looking into submarine cables and digital infrastructure security. And finally, supply chain resilience. So these are some of the findings from that workshop, and hopefully these are also areas that we would be open to cooperate in, not just the claimant states, but also the non-claimant states within ASEAN. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Charmaine. Of the big ticket items you mentioned, we can also call them hot button issues. don't forget the Thailand-Cambodia border tension. Yeah, I think that's going to persist for some time, probably into next year, especially if Cambodia files a case with the ICJ. This will be another 2 or 3 years at least. It's going to be long running. Thank you very much. And also, I think we've heard about COC now. It looks like the COC is almost ineffective or maybe doomed, can we say? Because China is not going to, even though there's a single text now, there's a kind of a version that all can negotiate on, but it's not gone ahead in any way, no headway. So we'll come back to COC. I also think about the ASEAN Charter, about ASEAN. And I will come to our next speaker, former Foreign Minister Kasit Pirom. He was Foreign Minister at a time when the ASEAN Charter was launched with the political security community, economic community, socio-cultural community. And 15 years ago, it looks like ASEAN was going somewhere. But now I think it's facing a series of challenges now. So maybe Ambassador Kasit Kap, you can share with us. Maybe you've seen a lot, 30 years, 40 years of being a diplomat, and including being a foreign minister of Thailand, and being kind of immersed in these regional issues, security issues. We have China, we have South China Sea, West Philippine Sea, and in a broader geostrategic context, how do we come up with rules? This is about rules and compliance with rules, and whose rules? How do we have rules that countries like China, a big country, would be willing to comply with, that other countries can also live by? Ambassador Kasit.
Sawadee krap. Greetings to everyone. But before saying anything about the South China Sea, may I also ask all of us to join in wishing the Philippines and the Filipinos people for their speedy recovery as a consequence of the earthquake and so on. And second, for us also to urge the AHA Center to do something about providing humanitarian assistance to the Philippines, and also by extension to the new Thai government. We should be sending food, medical team, various small construction materials to the Philippines. It's a bit delayed, and that's a worrying part about the state of affairs within the ASEAN, that we are no longer seems to be together as one entity. Okay. Now, I would like to start my intervention by stating that I am in full agreement with Justice Capio. The need for all of us to settle the dispute in a peaceful manner. That's the only way out. And I say this with the firm belief because I did lead the Thai delegation to the International Court of Justice, The Hague, the Netherlands, in our dispute over an area 4.6 square kilometers around the temple Pravihan. And all along, even before that, I was saying to Hun Sen, the then Prime Minister, as well as Honam Hong, the Foreign Minister, that we should complete our work within the scope of the MOU of 2000 and MOU of 2001. The first one was to settle the border dispute on land, 700 kilometers long. I think we have proceeded maybe 30%. And then the Cambodian side recourse to the crying wolf at the UN and then went to the court and so on, in spite of the fact that we have a framework and was a sort of a work result to pursue the settlement of the border dispute through peaceful negotiation, but that has not been the case. And now it lingers on to the present border conflict, in spite of the existence of the MOU of the year 2000. And on the sea, the MOU 2001, it could not move at all because two leaders, one on the Thai side, the Shinawatra family, the other on the Hun family of Cambodia, were not moving along the spirit and letters of the MOU of 2001, namely that the negotiation on the sea dispute area must be completed concurrently or simultaneously with the negotiation on the extraction of the resources under the sea. The two negotiations must be concluded more or less at the same time to be part and parcel of the whole bilateral agreement. But vested interest came into being for the past 20, 30 years and so on. And negotiation could not have taken place. The issue became a cause of conflict within the respective countries. So I leave that for the time being. Now coming back to the 9 dotted lines, and I welcome fully and also my admiration to the Philippine side for having won the case at the International Permanent Arbitration Court. And I express my deep disappointment at the behavior of the Chinese leadership all along. China, to be recalled, is a member of the UN Security Council, permanent UNSC member that has the responsibility for peace, security, and common prosperity. But China has not been behaving accordingly. It should be the example. Should have gone to The Hague. It refused to go. The decision came. It increased its military activities in the South China Sea in a very coercive, bullying manner, unbecoming of a civilization state and a permanent member of UNSC. Hopefully that the Chinese leadership could take stock of the whole thing, because by pursuing this aggressive, coercive behavior, the end result so far is the strengthening of the military alliances, especially of the Philippines and Vietnam with the United States. The more that China becomes more bullying and aggressive, the reaction becomes also stronger. And that invites more confrontation unnecessarily. And we have this impending COC thing. And the Chinese leadership for the past 10 years has been going around the world talking about a new world order with China in the leading role. And the word that keep on being repeated by the Chinese leadership is about peace. But whatever pronouncement at the BRI get together, AIIB, at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, SICA of Central Asia, G20, and so on, it did not and has not been matching the aggressive military behavior of China in the South China Sea. We have to wait for the change of mind, for the moderation, for the sense of purpose and sensibility and so on. That's one thing. But at the same time, ASEAN must come back together, because for the past 10-15 years, ASEAN seems to be going apart, and no one particular leader inside the ASEAN community has the courage and the self-sacrificing notion to take up the mantle of leadership, take the risk of the leadership, and so on. And if ASEAN is not together, then ASEAN is nowhere. And the word ASEAN centrality and the ASEAN people-centered entity has no meaning. But I could recall that when ASEAN is together as one, I think we could move mountains. And we did together succeed in getting Vietnam out of Cambodia in the course of the late 1980s. And we were able also to work together for the military junta at the time to realize the 7-point roadmap and the return of Myanmar to democracy and the reappearance of Daw Aung San Suu Kyi. And on the South China Sea, there should not be that much of the distinction between claimants and non-claimants. We are an ASEAN family. We need to work together as one. And if we were to be able to work together as one, then we could be a force to be reckoned with that could stand on our own without having to keep on answering the question whether we're going to go the American way or we're going to go the Chinese way. We are going the ASEAN way. And for the ASEAN way to come back to be together and so on, I have to urge once again to my Filipino friend here, because I've been saying this for so many times to many of the Filipino friends and so on, that the Filipinos, together with Vietnam and to a lesser extent even Malaysia, but the Filipinos in particular, with its victory at the Permanent Arbitration Court of Justice in The Hague, must take the lead in opposing any arbitrary action by the Chinese government. The Philippines must rally the togetherness of the sense of unity among all the ASEAN members. Take the lead. I even suggested to many of my Filipino friends to have a sort of a roving ambassador of the Philippines on the South China Sea, going around the ASEAN capital, rallying the ASEAN common spirit, togetherness, in order to stand up to China, not from a military point of view, but from the principled and valued point of view. And ASEAN side, under or with the leadership of the Philippines, can say this aloud, because not only the decision by the Permanent Arbitration Court that said that China has no historical facts, truth, to claim the 9-dash line, or even to pronounce the 9-dash line. And I would to recall a bit, about 5 or 6 decades ago, my father was the Director General of the Fine Arts Department. And together with the University of the Philippines and I think the Danish Marine Archaeology, we did have a project together to survey the wrecked sampan ships in South China Sea. Several were being found off the coast of the Philippines. They were Thai sampan with industrial products for export, earthenware, ceramic, celadons, and so on. My point is that the Thai sampan and sampans of everyone around South China Sea, from Korea, from Japan, right down to Thailand and so on, Indonesia, we were traveling freely there were no powers to prevent us. It was the freedom of navigation. And when the Portuguese Armada, the Spanish, the Dutch, the French, the English, and then finally the Americans came to Western Pacific, there was no presence of the Chinese Armada because that was ended, I think, in the year 1431. And the Chinese Armada, under the leadership of the Mongols, did meet kamikaze twice, and then they could not land on the shore of Japanese island. And the Armada also went to Western Java. They did not come back because they settled down near and in and around Surabaya. There was no Chinese presence for 500 years. What is this nonsense about the Nine Dash Line? And China, civilization state, would like to be world number one. It has to act as the big uncle next door, but not the bullying entity. But at the same time, the Philippines taking over the ASEAN leadership for the next year and so on, must take the mantle of the leadership and make sure that all the ASEAN member states work together through peaceful negotiation. Thank you very much. ขอบคุณมากครับ
Let me pick up on 2 points here. You will hear that you've heard the preamble to Ambassador Kassit's remarks had to do with Cambodia, right? Thai-Cambodia. So I want to convey clearly that this is a very important issue for Thailand, a very important issue for Thailand, and I think it's going to be around for some time. The MOU that he talked about, 2000, 2001, this is in the news every day. So we have a very tense border situation with Cambodia, and I will also say that nationalist sentiments are running high on both sides, running very high in Thailand, and I can sense, I can look at Cambodian media also very high there. It's very combustible, so something for the ASEAN chair next year to please bear that in mind. We have an interim observers team, but I think that there needs to be more. There needs to be some kind of an ASEAN military presence, combined peacekeeping presence along the border. Otherwise, very tense. So that's why Ambassador Kassit talked about that in the beginning. It's very important to us, and you might not recognize it being far away in the Philippines. The other issue that he talked about, when ASEAN was one, this is something that we should think about. When was the last time that ASEAN was one? Well, ASEAN 10 was one. The ASEAN Charter, I think, was proof that ASEAN could be united behind ASEAN Charter because they agreed to it. And I think something like the RCEP 2019 would be ASEAN united. But ASEAN 10, Ambassador Kassit talked about Vietnam, the tail end of the Cold War. That was ASEAN 6. It was ASEAN 5 and then became ASEAN 6 in 1984 with Brunei. So ASEAN 10 only been around since 1999. So it's been 26 years now. We will have ASEAN 11, right? And it's more difficult to have ASEAN as one when you have 10 and now plus 1, 11. But that's what we need to be looking at. How do we get ASEAN to be back as one? The floor now is opened. Questions, comments, remarks, anything you like. If there's any, I mentioned this to the Chinese diplomats, that if there's any Chinese view, comment, or perspective, I would welcome the Chinese view at the very beginning during the Q&A.
My name is Zhao Mengtao. I'm from the Chinese Embassy in Thailand. I'm the political counselor. So thank you very much, Professor. So I would like to give you some comments. So with the joint efforts by China and ASEAN countries, right now I think the situation in the South-China Sea maintained peace and stability and remained the safest and business busiest waters for international navigation and overflight. Not long ago, China and Indonesia signed an intergovernmental document on maritime joint development. China and Malaysia launched a bilateral dialogue on the management of maritime issues, and China has established a maritime dialogue mechanism with all the countries concerned. So right now, the responsibility for the current tension situation at the South China Sea does not lie with the Chinese side. And with China's facilitation, the consultation on the COC are accelerating. China is ready to work with ASEAN countries to set up communications, stay clear of the disturbances, and build consensus for an early conclusion of the COC, so as to truly make the South China Sea a sea of peace, friendship, and cooperation. So China stands ready to continue to resolve the relevant disputes peacefully through bilateral negotiation and consultation with the states directly concerned on the basis of respecting historical facts and in accordance with the international law. And China is also ready to make every effort with the states directly concerned to enter into a joint development in relevant maritime areas in order to achieve a win-win results and jointly maintain peace and stability in the South China Sea. So also we welcome the ASEAN countries to play a constructive role, because China and ASEAN are the comprehensive strategic partnership. So that is my comments. Thank you.
The Philippines and China entered into a memorandum of understanding during the time of the later years of the presidency of President Duterte to cooperate in developing the oil and gas in the West Philippine Sea. And the understanding was that China will participate in developing the oil and gas in accordance with Philippine law, in accordance with the service contract system of the Philippines. And that was signed. And I thought that we have found the solution to settle finally the South China Sea dispute, because China will participate in the development of the oil and gas in accordance with the law of the country, Philippine law. And after the signing of the MOU, the terms of reference was signed pursuant to the MOU. And there was a third agreement that has to be signed, that the Chinese commercial company will enter into the Philippine commercial company to develop, because the Philippines has granted the right to develop Reed Bank, that's in the EEZ of the Philippines, in accordance with the service contract system of the Philippines, and therefore the agreement was the service contractor of the Philippines will enter into an agreement with the China National Offshore Oil Company. But at the last minute, China said, we want the Philippines to remove that phrase in the service contract system of the Philippines that the oil and gas belong to the Philippines, and that they wanted to remove the phrase, the Philippine law will govern the contract. But that is within our EEZ. And if we remove that, we will be abandoning the arbitral award, and we will be in violation of our own constitution, because what was to be developed was within 200 nautical miles from our coastline. So the whole thing fell apart because at the last minute, China insisted that we abandon the arbitral award. That means we will abandon our rights to our exclusive economic zone. So China wants to enter into a development, and if you go to the website of the Chinese Foreign Ministry website in Beijing, it says there, joint development means that China owns the oil and gas, but because out of goodness, out of its the goodness of its heart, it will allow the other country to jointly develop. But that is not international law. I mean, no country will accept that. And that is why we terminated the further discussions on joint development with China, because China demands that we abandon our rights to our own exclusive economic zone. Thank you.
I'll just ask Dr. Charmaine and Ajahn Nin, what's the status? Is there going to be potentially an early conclusion of the COC? What's the status of the COC?
Well, in other forums, I made a point to say that, well, the COC is actually, quote unquote, dead on the water because of how stalled the negotiations have been. It's been about 20 plus years. And anyway, if we ever get to the point that it gets concluded, especially during the 2026 chairship of ASEAN, we need to make sure that it is a legally binding document. To ensure that the rules set forth in the code of conduct will really, be followed by anybody who signs into it. But as it stands, it's non-binding. So, yeah.
Yes, the COC is a product of the 2002 Declaration of Conduct, which says that the parties to the Declaration of Conduct, ASEAN and China, will draft and sign eventually a code of conduct. The code of conduct, the purpose is to maintain peace and stability without really determining or resolving the merits of the case. It was just to preserve peace and stability while the dispute is being settled on the merits under UNCLOS. But China at that time said, we will sign the code of conduct at the appropriate time, when that time is right. From the very start, China announced that. And up to now, it looks like the time is not ripe from China after more than 2 decades. And the reason why, because China wants to limit the COC to the spot list. Vietnam wants to include the paracels, and Vietnam will never agree to the COC that excludes the paracels. And we want to include Scarborough Shoal in the COC. China doesn't want to include the Scarborough Shoal in the COC. We want the COC to include the arbitral award of July 12, 2016. China doesn't want to include the arbitral award. We want to make the COC legally binding. China doesn't want to make the COC legally binding. So that's why everyone is saying it's really dead in the water. Thank you.
I won't repeat anything that Charmaine and Justice Capio just mentioned, but I would like to say that that there are various obstacles that just show that it's dead in the water. It's unlikely to we're unlikely to have a document by 2026, which is the deadline proposed by Indonesia. So one zone of applicability, what this document will bind what area, and this is something that the parties cannot agree on. Secondly, China wanted to insert a clause where I think it's about joint military operations, is that right? Yeah. And so that effectively gives the veto to China when, let's say, Philippines, you have an MDT with the US. You also have agreements with Japan, Australia, for example, joint military operations to enhance interoperability. But this clause will give China the veto power. So, what does this mean for long-standing alliances, for example, between the Philippines and China? Philippines and the US. So, that is a very strong sticking point. So this is why it's close to impossible, not only to meet the deadline, but actually having a legally binding document.
I would like to also draw an analogy to the Mekong region. So in a similar way, this is a kind of a fait accompli that China has come up with. For 30 years, we've had a clutch of agreements and frameworks with the Mekong River Commission, the Mekong Agreement, the Mekong Institute in Khon Kaen to promote cooperation of the Mekong River resources utilization. So, dams, building dams, for example, dam construction, but also, communities that rely, talking about human security, there are almost 60 million people who rely on the Mekong for livelihoods. So in the Mekong region, China has succeeded in setting up its own framework, and that is the Lanchang Mekong Cooperation, the LMC. And the reason is because the other riparian countries did not have other choices because they're smaller countries. China's a bigger country. China is upstream, and these countries other countries are downstream. But I can tell you, and I have to share this with our Chinese colleagues, that the lower downstream countries are not happy with it. If they have a choice, there's nothing else they can do. That's why they always welcome programs, agreements, or any kind of involvement from other external partners, and that would be the U.S., the U.S. Mekong program, and then the Japanese has a Mekong program, even the latest UK, and of course South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, and others, because they don't want to be confined to the LMC only, and which they still insist on calling the MLC, the Mekong first, and then Lanchang second, cooperation. And then that's also why the lower downstream countries still look at this another agreement we have in this neighborhood, mainland neighborhood, called the ACMEX, the Ayeyarwady, Chao Phraya A, Chao Phraya C, AC, Mekong M, Ayeyarwady River, Mekong River, Chao Phraya River, Thailand, and Mekong River, Economic Cooperation Strategy. So ACMEX is from 20 years ago. Just in order to have other vehicles of cooperation, of coordination of the use of Mekong River resources. But that's just, I think I was just making a point. I want to make a point that in the South China Sea is different, but it could be the same if you're not careful, which means that in the mainland, it's already been set up that way, and there seems to be no alternative at this time. The floor is now open again for questions, comments. I'm going to come to, okay. Before I come to you, Ambassador Kasit, would you have a quick contribution at this time?
Two sentences. One, I would like to propose here that we should have a Mekong agreement, like the Rhine, the Rhone, and whatever, and so on. That's the first proposal. I have said this for the past 10 years. We need an international agreement for the whole of the Mekong River basin. Second, UNCLOS EEZ, continental shelf, is a later human invention. And we have a dispute over this, claimant state and all of this. May I propose that the whole South China Sea become a common heritage of mankind, and all the claimant states in the area, plus people that have to send ships and aircraft across back and forth and so on. Why don't we have a joint development of the whole of the South China Sea? And this could have be done within the premises of the context of the United Nations organization. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think there's a question or comment.
I'm Xia Wenfang from the Chinese Embassy. I'm colleague of Councillor Zhao. As the few speakers have mentioned, the joint development in the South China Sea. So I would like to share some facts and views. In fact, one of the policy of China in the South China Sea is shelving disputes and conducting joint development. And we also appreciate the Thailand and Malaysia have conducted very well practice in the Bay of Thailand. The joint development administration between Thailand and Malaysia have been successfully worked over 40 years and enhanced the well-being of the laboring people. And from the perspective of China, we also conducted such kind of consultation and negotiation with the directly concerned South China Sea countries, for example, Vietnam, the Philippines, and also Brunei, and just my colleague mentioned Indonesia. We just received some consensus on that. And in fact, in 1995, there was a very positive momentum when the coastal countries in the South China Sea have reached a consensus on joint development that is among China, Vietnam, and Philippines in the Liyuetan of the South China Sea. And the state oil companies have conducted a tri-party exploration in Liyuetan and reached some positive progress. Unfortunately, because of the political issue in the Philippine side, this kind of cooperation haven't been pushed forward. So after ex-president of the Philippines, Duterte, took his office, the bilateral relations between China and the Philippines have become well. So our two sides have talked with each other to consume this joint development. And there are several rounds of consultations between Ministry of Foreign Affairs as well as the state oil companies. And just Justice Capio said, there was an agreement which is in discussion. And there are two very important clauses. The one is this cooperation will be in accordance with the law, both in the Philippines and in China. As you may know, if one side, one country, one sovereign country will conduct this kind of cooperation, it cannot go beyond its domestic law. So there was another clause, that is, this agreement will be without prejudice to the legal position of any side. So this is the way at that time we can found to help our two sides to get this kind of consensus. But at the very last minute, the Philippine side that they cannot agree. This should be in accordance with the both sides' law. It has to be with accordance with the Philippine side law. This is why this cooperation haven't got any updates. So I have to clarify these facts because at that time I work in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and I am engaged with this kind of consultation. And so personally, I'm frustrated because even China is a big country in the region. We have always been an important force to maintain peace and stability. And we have never tried to use or threat of force to be what maybe people said, aggressive or bullying. And when we look into the COC consultation, China is the first one country who initiate the negotiation of code of conduct, because at that time, after the Philippine side unilaterally initiated the arbitration, the unity of the ASEAN on the South China Sea becomes a big problem. And as China, we always uphold ASEAN centrality and ASEAN unity. I think that's a reason why China and ASEAN have shared so comprehensively relationship. In fact, since 2019, China has become the biggest trading partner with ASEAN. And right now, it has been consecutively for 5 years. And this year, the China-ASEAN Free Trade Agreement have been reached and will be concluded and signed within this year. I think when we look at the South China Sea issue, when we look at the maritime security, we should not forget the whole picture. As a regional country, the first priority for China is to safeguard the peace, stability, and prosperity. That's why, that makes sense. That's why our regional country have been the most varied and the most progressing region in the world. While other regions are full of conflicts, full of war, our region have maintained a place of peace for over 40 years. I think that's a great value that should be cherished by all. So I don't personally, and from the obligation of a Chinese diplomat, we cannot accept some, criticism to say the reason COC cannot be concluded is because China can maybe don't cooperate. I think from China, we always welcome the early conclusion of COC, and we agree, we welcome it should be substantive and legally binding. But for these disputes, for those parts which regional countries have to show their sincerity and to work at the same aim. And also, I have to clarify the reason why the disputes in the South China Sea is so complicated and difficult to handle, because there are 6 countries which are facing or the neighboring countries in the South China Sea. And not only in China with them have disputes, even others, they have disputes with each other. So it takes time, and it will ask us to make full use of our wisdom, of our confidence to address the disputes and to make the South China Sea a sea of peace, stability, and friendship. And when people say maybe 500 years ago, China haven't been to somewhere, but why China got this line -9? I have to say, in fact, even in the 2th century BC, in Xi-Han dynasty, the Chinese people have been conducted activities in the South China Sea. And China is the first one to discover, to name, and to utilize the 南沙群岛, 中沙群岛, 东沙群岛, and 西沙群岛, which is we called 南海诸岛. And China is the first one to exercise its administration continuously, peacefully, and effectively in the 南海诸岛. So we have our position because we have maybe going longer back to the history, maybe not just to 2012 or 2022. So the reason we cannot accept the arbitration is because the core issue between the China and the Philippines is because in 1970s, the Philippines have invaded some of the Chinese 南海诸岛. Because the scope of territory of Philippines have have been defined in a series of international agreements. So since that time, there are disputes between China and the Philippines. Because the core of the disputes is the territorial issue, and later it comes with the maritime delimitation issue. But the first one, UNCLOS, has not been done the territorial disputes. And second, China has already made an exemption for the dispute mechanism under the UNCLOS. So even at this time, China has tried to have dialogue with the Philippine side, but they haven't got any notice to China in advance. And they failed to fulfill the obligation for prior exchange of views and then initiate this arbitration. And the arbitration has a lot of fact and legal flaws, which I can make one example. For example, it classified Taiping Dao, in fact the Taiping Island, the largest island of Nansha Qundao, which spanning some 500,000 square meters as mere rock. This is the arbitral tribunal's finding, which, if this determination is completely, in fact, this determination is completely inconsistent with the physical reality of the South China Sea, because in Taiping Dao, there are lateral wells, and it can sustain the economic life of people there. Were such a standard be adopted, the global maritime landscape would be rewritten, and many countries' islands and reefs would lose the legal basis for claiming maritime rights and interests. This is just one example. So the Chinese government, we have stated very clearly that we would not recognize or accept the so-called awards and oppose and accept no claim or actions based on them. And I understand the Philippine friend will chair the ASEAN membership. I think we should find our common interest at first, and then try to address the disputes together, but not to make the disputes as the only one or the very first priority. Thus, it will enhance not only maybe the bilateral relations between China and Philippines, but also the common interests of ASEAN countries and our regional people. So that's what I would like to comment. If there is anything that you still have some misunderstanding, I would like to maybe talk to you later. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very, very much for your frank comment. You know, I've been moderating ICES public forums for 19 years. Normally, I would not allow the audience to go for so long. But if you had spoken for another hour, I would have not interrupted you because we want a fair representation of different views. That will elicit some response, I think, but I think there's a young gentleman here. I want to bring him in first, and then we'll come back to the other speakers.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm Itipan Premsi, undergraduate student from Thammasat University. I have a question about the external factor concerning the development in the South China Sea, the West Philippine Sea. It is undeniable that because of its geographical proximity, the rising temperature in cross-strait relation between the People's Republic government and the Republic government would influence the development of the South China Sea. I really want to know personally from the Philippine perspective, so Dr. Chairman and Justice Capio, will this impact the development and the role that ASEAN will play, the role that each country, each claimant will play in the development and settling of dispute in South China Sea? And if it impact, how will it impact? That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm wondering, my students are not speaking up. This is a question from Thammasat University student versus Juฬa University student. Any other questions, comment from the floor before I come back to the speakers? I think Julio did you have your hand up? Please tell us who you are and go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Julio Amador from the Philippines. We can talk about the South China Sea all we want. But if we are serious about solving this, the avenue was provided through the arbitration process, right? So then how can we resolve in fairness and in truth all the facts that have been laid out if the Chinese side did not join the Philippines in the arbitration? The thing is, UNCLOS was something that both the Philippines and China signed. It is binding. It is something that we should be using. Yet we are told that we did not abide by the DOC, the Declaration of the Conduct on Parties on the South China Sea. The problem is that the DOC is a political document, right? It is not a binding treaty on ASEAN and the Philippines and then China. But at the same time, if you have observed the process since 1995, when the Chinese had incursions in Mischief Reef, right? And you can see this in the news. The claims were they were fishermen's shelter, that they were temporary and they were going to be removed once the typhoons were done. Then we found out that the fishermen's shelters had anti-aircraft guns, and now they are artificial islands. Fast forward to 2002, we finally settled on a political agreement called the DOC because we could not agree yet on an initial code of conduct. Negotiations are still ongoing until such time as the Scarborough Shoal incident happened and we were forced to bring the matter to the attention of the UN system through UNCLOS and then the arbitral tribunal, which is, of course, an institution under the UNCLOS or the law of the sea. If you check the arbitral tribunal decision, you could actually find all the historical documents related to the negotiations. That showed that Philippines, along with ASEAN, never stopped negotiating with China on the South China Sea. And to be told that we have not negotiated with China, I think is historically incorrect. You can check the arbitration award, you can see all the documentation there, and you can satisfy yourself that the Philippines has tried to do this. But aside from this, the Philippines has done its best to work with China. The first state visit of the Philippine president, President Marcos, was to China. Can you imagine? No, we have had disputes, but the first state visit was to China. But while he was visiting China, our Coast Guard vessels were subjected to laser attacks, were subjected to bad seamanship, were subjected to harassment at sea, and dangerous maneuvers. So when the president came back, the good faith that he was trying to bring seems to have been shattered in the South China Sea. So which brings us to questions of joint development. From the Philippine perspective, there is no dispute on the maritime front because the arbitral tribunal has ruled that there are no overlapping boundaries between Philippines and China. The territorial disputes, we will have to discuss that. We will have to negotiate. But on the maritime aspect, it is clear that from an international legal standpoint, there are no disputes. Which brings me to my final point. Ajahn Titinan mentioned that Thailand will go to ICJ on this issue with Cambodia. Maybe, no. But how can we trust international institutions now if we are debating facts, disputable facts in media and in public, but not in the institutions that we agreed to solve these problems in, including UN institutions? So that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to have a last round here. There's a hand in the back. Any other comment, questions? Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'm not here to make a comment, but just questions. I'm from Singapore. I'm a student, graduate student from this faculty as well. So finally, a question from Juฬa student. So I'm from Singapore. Anyway, I just have questions really about from both sides. I think from Philippine side, insist wanting to have ASEAN together, right, to confront China or discuss with China about this issue. And from the China side, I think insisted about the bilateral discussion. Is there any particular reason, I think, or comments you want to make on the mechanism both sides want to take a different approach for the conversation with South China Sea? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other comment, question? If not, we're going to come back to the speakers. Two things I think are interesting. The joint development framework, modality, and template. The Thailand-Malaysia JDA has been very successful. But the Thailand-Cambodia OCA, overlapping claims area, has not been successful. It's not actually proceeded. So it's interesting how, if we want to look in detail about how joint development could work, the Thailand-Malaysia could be a good example. The bilateral and beyond, this is not uncommon. So, for example, Thailand-Cambodia, Thailand would like to keep it bilateral. Cambodia would like to go global, international. And so the dynamics are obvious. Bilateral is confined to the two. And if not, then it's more than the two beyond. So I'll come back to the speakers. I want to maybe, Justice Capio, maybe perhaps invite you if you have any parting remarks to make, leave with us as a takeaway.
Yeah, I'd like to read the DOC, the Declaration of Conduct, which says that the dispute shall be settled in accordance, and I'm quoting now the DOC, in accordance with universally recognized principles of international law, including the 1982 UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. So in other words, the dispute should be settled in accordance with UNCLOS, the 1982 Convention on the Law of the Sea. And that's precisely why the Philippines went to an arbitral tribunal under UNCLOS. So that's very clear. Regarding your question, what would be the impact of the South China Sea dispute to the world? Is that your question? Between China and Taiwan? Well, of course, if China invades Taiwan, there will be, the Philippines is just beside Taiwan, and China will have to blockade the Beset Channel to invade Taiwan. And Beset Channel is Philippine territorial sea, because we have a lot of islands there. So that means China will have to blockade our own territorial sea. That will affect also. It's just too close. It's difficult to separate. If China invades Taiwan, the number one thing that they would do is to blockade the Beset Channel, because the Beset Channel is a way for naval ships from the Pacific to enter the South China Sea. And a blockade of our own territorial sea would involve the Philippines. Thank you.
Jermaine, a quick response to any of the comments mentioned?
Thank you. I think I'd like to pick on the, to answer the question about the preference on whether bilateral or multilateral. The Philippines has actually done both. Both negotiated bilaterally and also found recourse to multilateral platforms. So I think it's not so much an either-or choice on the part of the Philippines. It's really leveraging and using any available mechanism out there.
Okay, thank you. Maybe Ajahn Nin to respond to your student. The question is, cross-strait tension, China-Taiwan, China-ROC, how would that impinge on the South China Sea developments, tension and confrontation in the South China Sea? Could China have a lot of these issues? There's a lot of issues, mainland, Mekong, and then the Taiwan and the South China Sea.
So, really interesting question. I'm with Justice Capio, so of course it's going to have physical security implications. Also, I would like to mention labor. because a lot of Southeast Asians are in Taiwan. So that would automatically bring mainland into, be more concerned about, the South China Sea dispute and all that, that more than we are at the moment. So another question about your question about bilateral, multilateral. I'm with Charmaine here, so it can go hand in hand. I mentioned in my talk that if we iron out our bilateral differences within ASEAN, and that would make a stronger ASEAN, so that would strengthen the multilateral framework, I think.
If I may, my question is mainly for the China side. Why they insist in the bilateral?
Oh, okay, sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Well, this reminds me that Madame Fu Ying said to me one time that ASEAN is a quote, right? Very easy to remember. ASEAN will never support, China will never support ASEAN to unite against China. It's so true. Why would China do that? So that's why we have a preference for bilateral. And so I'll come back to the your remark earlier about ASEAN as one. I like that a lot because it seems so elusive. The last time was I don't know when we have ASEAN as one again. How would you maybe help us wrap up here with maybe some insight based on your maybe even wisdom based on your experiences, diplomatic postings, foreign minister at that time, I remember 2009, 2010, the ASEAN Charter was launched. Thailand got to chair ASEAN for 18 months, and we had the issue with Myanmar. And so we had this summit in Hua Hin. You remember? In Hua Hin. And then you and beset had a compromise, saw the Myanmar civil society on the side, but Myanmar military government in the front. So what do we do now, Tantut? ASEAN, West Philippine Sea, South China Sea, how do we move forward?
I have 3 sentences, okay? First, I appreciated very highly the role of President Yo-Yo Bambang and the Foreign Minister Marty Nakagawa in providing the ASEAN leadership, helping both Thailand and Cambodia to stick to the negotiating table, and the involvement of the UN and the International Court of Justice. And if you recall, going back another 20 years back, we have the Foreign Minister of Indonesia, Ali Alatas. And if we go back further, we have Tanat Koman and all of this. So at various periods of ASEAN, we did have one particular or 2 personalities that provide the leadership and the sense of purpose of ASEAN. And hopefully, under President Marcos Jr., that spirit of Romero, the former foreign minister of the Philippines, would come back again. I'm sure the Philippines society would be able to provide a leader that could reunite and lead ASEAN once again. That's the first point. Second, we all emerged from Western Africa. And so when we say that who was there, who owned what, is an endless story. We have to come to the present of trying to live and work and accommodate one another with respect. And my third point is that since the Communist Party took over in China, the successive leadership of China was lying low, buying for time, until China is strong enough to re-emerge on the world stage. And that did happen about 15 years ago under the present leadership of China. China standing tall in the world, a very mighty China indeed. But I would like to ask my Chinese friends here, both from the government and from the party, that please be nice uncle next door, be compassionate, be kind, and let's sit down and talk and move Asia Pacific together for peace and common prosperity. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I think that's a good way for us to end this forum and for our takeaway that ASEAN can draw inspiration from its legacy. Was an ASEAN spirit that we can draw inspiration from back in the days of the founding. And then the starting point, I think it matters, it's consequential. Like, where do we start if you look at the South China Sea? Because that will determine the pathway of negotiation and compromise and agreement. And then I think the last point, Ambassador Kassit mentioned, about hearts and minds. If you want to win over neighbors and hearts and minds, there are certain ways of doing it. There's certain ways of not doing it. You can still have the outcome, but would the outcome be a willing one or a resistant one? I think that's where we are heading towards. So please join me in thanking the speakers, Justice Carpio, Dr. Charmaine, Dr. Chanintira, Professor Chanintira, and Ambassador Kassit. Thank you very much for joining us, for making time, taking a trip. And thank you everyone for coming.